Welcome back to the Speak Easy English channel, the show where we take the hardest, the really naughtiest pieces of information, the things that make you pause mid-sentence, and we try to transform them to clear, actionable knowledge.
And we have a big one today.
We really do. Today, we are tackling a foundational challenge that I think plagues nearly every single dedicated English language learner. We're talking about the three most confusing yet absolutely crucial little words in the entire language.
It's so true. We are focusing on what you might call the tricky triplets: in, on, and at.
Exactly.
These prepositions of time and place are everywhere. You cannot build a sentence without them. But the difficulty, and you know this, the difficulty comes from the fact that they almost never translate directly from other languages.
That's the trap.
It is.
Yeah.
You can't rely on your native tongue's equivalent word. You really have to understand the underlying English concept.
Right. So our mission today is to act as your dedicated English instructors, cutting through all that confusion. Think of this deep dive as a kind of focused lesson from the Speak Easy English channel.
Yeah.
We promise to give you, the dedicated learner, the conceptual architecture, and the really clear examples you need to finally master these little giants. We want to give you mental shortcuts you can actually rely on to move beyond just, memorization.
And our whole strategy here is to move you toward a true conceptual understanding. We're going to focus on two key interconnected ideas that govern how they're used for both time and place.
Okay.
So first, there's the physical relationship. Are we talking about being inside something, on a surface, or simply at a specific location?
Right.
And second, there's specificity. Especially with time, are we talking about a huge, massive chunk of time, or are we narrowing down to a tiny, instantaneous point? That specificity hierarchy, that is the key to clarity.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're going to establish a mental model right now that will, I think, serve as our guide throughout the rest of this conversation. When we talk about in, on, and at, you have to stop thinking of them as just vague little words and start seeing them as extremely precise spatial markers.
Let's start with those fundamental concepts, focusing first on that physical relationship in space. This model is, I find, often the easiest way in for learners because it connects to things you can literally see and touch.
Right. So if you picture the word in, what should immediately come to mind is the container.
Yes.
It represents being inside something within a defined volume or confined by a physical boundary. So think of a box, a room, or even something huge like a lake or a country. It's all about the enclosure, the volume, that withinness.
And this concept of the container, it scales up, infinitely. It applies whether you're putting an apple in a bag or whether you live in a city. The city has boundaries, so you are within its volume. That's really the key identifier for in.
Okay, so moving on to on. If in is the volume, on is purely the surface.
Exactly.
It indicates physical contact being placed on top of or supported by something flat. So on the floor, on a table, it's about being right on the top plane of an object, not inside it.
And crucially, this is important, on also represents being on a line. A line is basically a one-dimensional surface. And this is why when we get to prepositions of place, we'll talk about things being on a street. The street is a surface we travel on, a line we follow.
And finally, that brings us to at. And at is the point.
The most precise.
It's the most precise, yeah. It doesn't mean you're inside or on top, but rather at a specific designated location or very close to it. It just pinpoints the area of action. So when you give a full address, you're identifying one exact spot, one single point in space.
And the beauty of this in English is that this spatial model, this physical relationship, it carries over almost perfectly into how we conceptualize time. And that brings us to our second concept, specificity, or the cone model.
Okay, the cone model.
Yeah, just imagine an inverted cone, so it's widest at the top, representing the least specific time, and it narrows all the way down to a single point at the bottom, which is the most specific.
Okay, that visual is really helpful. So in is at the top, it's the widest segment, the whole top volume of that cone. It's like a huge storage box for time.
Precisely. In is for the longest, most generalized, and often, indeterminate periods. We're talking vast stretches of time, centuries, entire years, decades, seasons.
Right.
When you use in, you are sort of standing outside of that enormous time block, looking in at the volume of time it contains, you say in the 18th century or in 1985. You're not standing on one particular day, you're conceptualizing the whole era as one big container.
Then we move down the cone to the medium-sized chunks, and that's where on sits. So this must be the transition from that big volume to a more definite marker.
That's it. On shifts you from the volume to a definite line or a segment on the calendar. So this preposition is used so consistently for days and specific dates.
Oh.
Think of your calendar on the wall. It's a grid of surfaces, right? So you are on Tuesday or on June 15th. It marks a clear, defined line segment of 24 hours.
And the very tip of the cone, the smallest, most instantaneous and precise point that has to be...
Correct. At is reserved for the most pinpointed measurements, the exact clock times. At 3 o'clock, at 11:05 a.m., it links directly back to its function as a specific point in space. This conceptual hierarchy, volume in, line on, point at, this is the framework we'll use to navigate everything else.
So if you can remember that cone model, you're already halfway there.
You really are.
That cone model is just so useful for visualizing time. So let's immediately put it to the test. If we start at the top, focusing just on time, where does our rule about volume, our in container, really come into play?
Okay, so we begin with in for long, indeterminate periods. We are talking about the largest containers of time, periods that hold many, many smaller days or moments inside them.
So if the period lasts for many weeks or months, it falls into in, which means all our months go into the in category.
Absolutely. We always say in January, in December. A month is like a 30-day box. If your friend asks when your holiday is, you simply say, I'll be traveling in July.
Because you're referring to any time contained within that 31-day volume.
That's it. And the same logic applies to all seasons.
Okay, wait. I noticed that seasons fall under in the summer and winter, even though they only last a few months. Why doesn't something like on summer work, since we treat days with on?
That's a great question, and it really highlights the conceptual distinction. A day is a specific, countable line on a calendar.
Right.
A season, however, is treated as a continuous, generalized volume or an atmosphere. We speak about the conditions contained within that 3-month period. It rains a lot in spring.
Ah, I see.
You're talking about the general conditions throughout the whole volume of spring, not one specific day called spring.
That makes sense. It's the conceptual generalization.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving even bigger. We use in for all long eras, years, decades, and centuries.
Yes. The company was founded in 2008. Fashion changed dramatically in the 1980s. You were looking at those 99 years or those 10 years as these enclosed volumes of history. You would never say on 1985.
Right.
Because that implies 1985 is a surface you can stand on, which just isn't how we conceptualize large periods of time in English.
And what about periods that aren't really measured by the calendar, but are still huge volumes?
That takes us to generalized periods like in the Ice Age, or when we're speaking generally about the future and past, in the past or in the future. These are abstract time containers.
I see.
So you could say they believe that humanity will achieve space colonization in the future. That whole vast, unspecified period is treated as a volume.
Now, here's a slightly tricky one under in, how we handle parts of the day. Generally, we use in for the morning, the afternoon, and the evening.
Correct. I always drink coffee in the morning. We usually meet in the evening. These are also treated as volumes. The 3 or 4 hours that make up the morning period are seen as a container of time. It's interesting because in other languages, you might use the equivalent of at here, but in English, these prolonged blocks need in.
Okay, so descending the cone now, we hit on, this is for specific days and dates, the line on the calendar. This feels very mechanical, like maybe the most reliable rule on the whole set.
It is extremely reliable. If you can name the day, it's on. It's that simple. So all days of the week use on. We have our staff meeting on Friday.
Or the market is open on Mondays and Wednesdays.
Just exactly.
Now, I often see people struggling when they add a qualifier to the day. Does that rule change if I specify, say, a part of that day?
It does not change. The specific day is the dominant feature. So I only eat vegetables on Tuesday mornings, or the class runs late on Friday afternoons. The presence of the day, Tuesday or Friday, just locks in the use of on.
And this rule is also fixed for full dates. The moment you add the number to the month, you move from the vague in, the container, to the precise on, the line.
Precisely. We move from in March to on March 6th, or on September 24th, or on the 2nd of August. That specific 24-hour segment is the surface, the line on the calendar.
And this leads us to a really helpful shortcut, which is about special days with day. If the name of the special occasion actually includes the word day, it uses on.
Oh, this is a fantastic memory tool for learners. It really is. We say on Christmas Day or on New Year's Day. Why? Because you are specifying that single 24-hour block of time you're standing on that day.
I will be traveling on my birthday.
Perfect.
Finally, we arrive at, the pinpoint at the bottom of the cone. This is at for exact moments. And this rule feels the most logical because at is always about precision.
And the most obvious use is for clock times. If you specify the hour and minute, it must be at. Lessons start at 8:30 sharp. The bank opens at 9 a.m. We're literally pointing to a single moment in time.
Now, why do we use at so consistently for meal times and breaks? These times aren't always precise clock times in the modern world, but they are linguistically treated as fixed points.
That's a great observation. The reason is really historical and conventional. Historically, meal times, lunch, dinner, they were fixed, communal points in the day, much like noon or midnight. And the linguistic convention just treats them as designated points, even if your personal lunchtime varies. So we say, we will meet at lunchtime, or there was a loud announcement at break time.
We also reserve at for those specific points a day that act like a clock time, such as at noon, at midday, at midnight, and at dawn.
Those are all fixed transition points. Dawn is the exact moment the sun breaks. Midnight is the exact flip from one day to the next.
And this brings us to that famous grammatical anomaly, the night exception. We established that morning, afternoon, and evening all use in because they're prolonged volumes of time. So why is night different? Why do we use at for the general nighttime period?
This is a classic quirk of the language. We use at night when we speak generally about the darkness period as a whole, often for routine actions. For example, bats hunt at night.
Or I fight it right asleep at night.
Exactly. It's treated less as a container and more as a designated time slot for an activity like a point. This is the one you just have to memorize, as it really does defy the parts of the day rule we set up earlier.
Now we have to address the nuances and exceptions, because these are the details that separate a fluent speaker from a hesitant one. The first big one is the holiday rule, the splint between at and on for festive periods.
This rule directly uses both the point and the line concepts we talked about. We use 8T for festivals when you don't use the word day, specifically referring to the general period, the festive time, which we treat as a singular point in the year.
I see.
So if we say we usually travel abroad at Christmas, we mean the entire Christmas season, maybe from the 20th to the 30th of December. This applies to at Easter, at Thanksgiving, or at Diwali.
So at refers to the atmosphere of the general block of time around the main event. But the moment we focus on that specific 24-hour period, we switch back to on because that's our line rule for days.
Exactly right. You use on for the specific holiday day itself. So on Christmas Day, on New Year's Eve, if you're opening presents at 8 a.m., that happens on Christmas Day. But if you're discussing the party schedule for the entire season, it happens at Christmas.
Presence or absence of the word day is a really reliable signpost.
It's a great little trick.
Okay, let's go back to that night split distinction you introduced earlier, because learners confuse at night and in the night constantly.
This is a perfect demonstration of how context changes the preposition's meaning. We use at night when talking generally or routinely about the whole night period, as we discussed. It's the designated time for darkness.
But if something specific, non-routine, or unexpected happened during that time, like an interruption, it's in the night.
Yes. If a burglar alarm went off, you would say, I heard a strange noise in the night. This refers to a specific event that occurred within the volume of the dark hours, interrupting the quiet. The baby waking up is usually a specific event, so you'd say, the baby often wakes up in the night. It's about being inside that time frame when the action takes place, moving it back towards our container idea.
That slight shift from the general point of time to the container where an event occurred is so subtle but so essential.
It truly is.
Finally, we have the omission rule, which is perhaps the most significant trap for learners translating from other languages. We need to emphasize strongly that at, in, or on are not used before the words last, next, every, or this.
This rule is rigid. It's non-negotiable in English. If you use one of these 4 words to define time, the preposition just vanishes. If you say, we will meet on next Monday, that is a classic error.
So the correct usage is just, we will meet next Monday.
Just that. And this applies to the in words as well. For instance, you absolutely cannot say, I traveled to France in last July. It has to be, I traveled to France last July.
So the word last acts as the connector, and it replaces the function of the preposition.
It does. And with this evening, it is, we'll call you this evening, not we'll call you in this evening. These 4 words, last, next, every, this, they swallow the preposition. If you're preparing for an English test, marking these down as definite preposition killers is crucial.
That is definitely one of those mental shortcuts that pays immediate dividends. Use the word, lose the preposition. Let's shift gears from time back to space. Returning to our physical model, in volume, on surface, at point. These spatial rules are often easier to visualize, but the exceptions involving transport in public places are where things can get a little messy.
We begin again with in for large areas and enclosed spaces, the container. This represents being physically surrounded by boundaries.
So this first covers all huge geographical areas. If it's a big defined area, you're in it. We live in the UK, in North America, in Paris, even parts of a larger area, in the mountains, in the north of Spain, in my neighborhood. You're contained within the boundary lines.
And naturally, in is mandatory for all enclosed spaces, rooms, buildings, or containers where you are physically within the walls or boundaries. Is John in the kitchen? I left my keys in my room.
We're putting something in a bag.
Yes, it is within its volume. Even natural area like a forest or a defined park are treated as volumes. I love hiking in the park.
Okay, now for the first and most critical transportation distinction. Transportation exception 1, small vehicles. If you had to climb to a small private vehicle where you can't stand up and move freely, we use in.
This is the rule of the container holding you. Your car is a container. Dad is waiting for you in the car. I read the whole book while I was in a taxi. The act of sitting down and being confined within the volume is the key.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. INCO also governs certain types of digital and print media. Why do we say in the newspaper?
Because we are referring to the content inside the communication contained within the physical pages or the digital file. I read an amazing article in the newspaper.
Or the error was printed in the report.
Yes, we are accessing the content within the document's volume.
Okay, moving on to on, focusing on the surface and the line.
Physical contact surface is the primary spatial use. If it supports you or physically touches you, it's on. The papers are on the coffee table. Please don't leave your clothes on the floor.
And this surface concept extends vertically too, right? Like the floors in a building.
Exactly. When you are discussing which level of a building you live or work on, you're referring to the surface of that floor structure. So, I live on the 12th floor. The physical contact with that horizontal plane dictates the use of on.
The concept of the surface extends crucially to roads and streets because we view them as lines we travel along.
Yes. A street is a line or surface laid out for transport. We say, the restaurant is on Victoria Street, or I need to turn left on Fifth Avenue. You are traversing the surface of the street.
I know this has a slight geographical nuance, though. I've sometimes heard in the street used in British English. Does that contradict the on the line rule?
It does create a slight wrinkle. While on Renton Street is the standard line reference, you might hear in the street in some parts of the UK, especially if you're referring to something happening within the physical street area, the volume between the buildings, not just the road surface.
Like there was a lot of trash in the street after the storm.
Exactly. But as a general rule, you should stick to on for identification and travel along a street.
Okay, now for the second major transportation exception. Transportation exception 2, large vehicles. This is where the container rule fails us and the surface rule takes over.
This is the critical test. If the vehicle is large enough that you can stand up, walk around, and move on the deck or surface, we use on. It treats the vehicle floor as a surface, not a confining volume.
And this covers all large public transit.
On the bus, on the train, on the subway, on the plane. Also, any mode that relies entirely on a physical surface for movement, on a bike, on a scooter, or traveling on foot. The rule of on the surface is king here.
And just as we used for print media content, we use on for digital or broadcast media when we're referring to the platform or surface itself.
We view these platforms as surfaces we access. I watched the documentary on Netflix. There's too much conflicting information on the internet. We're traversing the surface of the platform.
And we also say she is on the phone.
Yes, meaning she is using the phone system, the communicative surface.
Moving to the highly specific locations, we have at for specific points and address is the pinpoint.
If you give the full address, the precise location requires at. Sherlock Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street. You are directing attention to one tiny point on the map.
And we use at for specific public location sites where the focus is the general site boundary or the activity that takes place there.
Yes. We are meeting at the cafe. The concert is at the stadium. The location is treated as a specific dot on the map. You might say she studies at Oxford University. You might not know which building she's in, but you know the general point of the institution.
And this includes those common fixed points that refer to institutional locations.
Right. I'm at home waiting, I'm at work, I'm at the airport. These are all treated as specific functional points in space. You're pointing to your general location without needing to specify the room.
Okay, this segment is where the rubber meets the road. we're going to tackle those specific scenarios where in, on, and at might seem interchangeable, but a crucial difference in meaning dictates which one you use.
Right.
We're focusing now on the difference between being in an activity or a state and being at a location.
Let's start with a classic spatial confusion, the beach dilemma, on versus at. Learners often wonder why both at the beach and on the beach exist.
So if you are talking about the literal physical presence on the sand or the surface, it's on the beach. The children were busy burying their father on the beach. You are physically in contact with the surface.
However, if you were referring to the general presence in the area, or you were talking about vacationing in that coastal vicinity, you use at the beach. If you say, I'll be at the beach for 2 weeks, you mean you'll be in the general resort area, the hotels, the shops, the whole specific location complex.
So at refers to the point of the destination, while on refers to the surface contact.
That's it.
That makes the distinction so clear. If I'm looking for seashells, I'm on the beach. If I'm planning my vacation, I'm going to be at the beach.
Exactly. And that same nuanced distinction applies so powerfully to institutions. At school versus in the school. The preposition changes whether you are discussing your routine purpose or your physical location within the structure.
Okay, let's break this down meticulously because this is a source of constant error. When do we use at for an institution?
When you use at school, at university, at work, or at home, you are referring to the activity or the institution as a general concept or routine. If I say, I'm at work now, but I can call you later, I'm talking about my employment status.
Right.
It's about the concept of attending or being engaged in that activity.
So if I say my daughter is at university, I'm talking about her status as a student, her routine. But if I use in the school, in the office, or in the hospital, I am emphasizing being physically inside the building, often for a specific or non-routine purpose.
Precisely. If I arrive at the university and tell the security guard I left my phone in the library, I am pointing to the specific enclosed volume within the complex.
Right.
Or if I say I'm in the office today, even though I usually work from home, I am emphasizing my physical presence inside the walls of the building.
The hospital test is a fantastic way to internalize this difference because the stakes are high.
The difference is stark. If you say, I spent 3 days in the hospital due to a minor procedure, in che means you are a patient. You are confined and receiving care within the volume of the facility. You are part of the institution's core function.
But if you say, I was at the hospital for 2 hours this morning, at means you were at that specific location, visiting a friend, dropping off supplies, attending a meeting. You are not a patient yourself.
You're at the fixed point, but not in the state of being confined or treated.
So knowing whether to use in or at completely changes the listener's perception of your medical status.
Absolutely. It demonstrates the grammatical importance of this conceptual distinction.
Let's shift our focus to figurative time again, with the difference between on time versus in time. They sound so similar, but one is about punctuality and the other is about margin.
On time refers to punctuality. It means exactly at the designated moment, meeting the schedule or the line. The train arrived precisely on time. There's no margin for error. You hit the specific point or line.
And in time means with enough time to spare before a deadline or an event. It means a tiempo de, or just ahead of the cutoff.
Correct. We rushed to the station and got there just in time to catch the train. We didn't arrive precisely on the moment the train left, but we arrived within the volume of time needed to board it.
So if you arrive in time, you succeed. If you arrive on time, you are punctual.
That's the difference.
We also have the figurative endings confusion. At the end versus in the end. This is another one where translation often fails.
At the end refers to the physical or temporal conclusion of a specific structure or event. It's the final point. Please submit your questions at the end of the lecture.
Or at the end of the road, turn left.
Yes. And in the end is purely metaphorical. It's an idiom meaning finally or ultimately. For example, after weeks of debating the issue, in the end we decided to take a completely different approach. It functions as a sentence modifier, commenting on the final outcome, not the final moment of an event.
To wrap up the instructional part of this deep dive, let's revisit 3 major pitfalls that often trip up even intermediate learners. Recognizing these traps is key to self-correction.
Error 1. Arriving. This is a highly frequent mistake rooted in direct translation. When using the verb to arrive, you should never use the preposition to.
Instead, you have to use at or in. We use at for specific smaller locations or buildings, maintaining that point focus. We arrived at the bank just before closing.
And we use in for large expansive areas like cities, regions, or countries, maintaining the volume focus. They finally arrived in Paris after the long train journey. The structure is strict. Arrive in a large place, arrive at a small place.
Error 2. Parts of the day. We touched on this earlier, but its prevalence in errors demands reinforcement. Never use at for the general volumes of morning, afternoon, or evening.
That's right. While you might hear at the morning from non-native speakers, it is incorrect. You must use in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. Remember, the night exception is the only one that uses at when referring to the general time period.
And error 3. The small versus large transport mistake. This goes back to the difference between small and large vehicles, that persistent confusion between in container and on surface deck.
This is so crucial for fluent communication. Always remember the distinction. If you can stand and move around, it's on. Bus, train, plane. If you must climb to a small space, it's in. Car, taxi.
So the mistake is saying, I ran into my friend in the train.
Yes. The correction, as we learned, is I ran into my friend on the train. That can you stand up test is truly the most effective quick check for transport prepositions. Mastering this rule proves you've shifted your thinking from literal translation to English conceptualization.
It really does.
We've covered a vast amount of ground, moving from the high-level conceptual models right down to the precise rules and exceptions regarding time, place, and figurative usage. The core framework of volume, surface line, and point is your navigational map.
Let's reinforce that map one last time. For time, think of the specificity cone. In is the volume, centuries, years, months, seasons. On is the line, days, specific dates. At is the pinpoint, exact clock times, meal times.
And for place, think of the physical relationship. In is the container, inside, volume, rooms, countries, small cars. On is the surface or line, tables, floors, streets, large public transit. And at is the specific point, addresses, fixed locations, or general institutional concepts like at school or at work.
The value of this deep dive as your instructors from Speakeasy English is that you now understand why these rules exist. They reflect how native speakers mentally organize and compartmentalize reality, time, and space.
This knowledge is the start, but continuous practice, active reading, and immediate self-correction are vital to internalize these rules until they become automatic. Don't rely on guesswork, rely on the model.
So we leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on the concepts we've established. We learned that we use for surfaces and digital platforms on the internet, on YouTube. If the internet is a surface you traverse, does that subconsciously make you feel like you are traveling across specific flat planes or browsing distinct platforms that sit on the digital landscape? Is a common phrase, I am on social media, an indication that we treat these digital spaces like actual physical surfaces we are standing on, rather than being fully immersed in a cyberspace volume.
Consider how that subtle linguistic choice shapes your interaction with the virtual world. Keep practicing those triplets, and remember the cone and the container. You are now well equipped to master the trickiest triplets in English grammar.